Okay, now you can talk about all the different bugs. So where was the memory leak bug that you were talking about? Ben?
Sorry, what?
I just wondered where the memory leak. You said you were iterating over components.
Yeah. So it was we were having the problem in the bookstore, the application store, and then it happened again in the page store. And so what was going on is in the subchapters, we were iterating over subchapters, and all the subchapters were listening to the pages store.
Okay, so where is that code at?
And that's going to be subchapter.jsx in the books folder. And I should have just barely changed it to props. Let me make sure that's right.
I haven't pulled, so. But I actually wanted to take a look at the bug just so that we could talk through it here really quickly. Because one of the problems that you'll frequently see, maybe not frequently, but if you're using the Flux architecture, we have this base component that a lot of our components that interact with the stores inherit from this base component. And there's this watch stores method and an unwatch stores method. So if you inherit from the base component, then when that component mounts, it's going to watch any stores that you list, and that looks like this. So in your constructor, you say this.stores equal these stores, and then once you have that in place, the base component will handle wiring those up. So then if you do what you were saying, which it sounds like the subchapter,
the highlight display.jsx.
Okay, so subchapter inherits from base component. So whenever this thing mounts, it would listen to stores, but it doesn't have any stores to listen to, so that should be fine, right?
Yeah, it was a highlight display. That's one on there.
Okay, so highlight display.
Yep.
I don't see highlight display.
Also, note display is the same thing. How long has it been since you pulled?
This morning.
Should be there.
Okay. Well, we have note display. So here again, note display extends base components, and it listens on the bookstore. So you're saying that by iterating over a lot of these note displays, you're seeing that error?
Yeah. No, it was mostly the highlight display that was doing it the second time, but yeah, I think that's part of it.
Okay, so where is the code that actually renders the highlight display and the note display?
It happens in two places. One of them is in the pop-up pane, and then the other one is in the one in the dashboard, the Marks Navigator.
Okay, so let's look at the one in the dashboard. Which one? Where is it at?
Marks Navigator.jsx.
Oh. Okay, so the dashboard renders the Marks Navigator, and then this guy renders a whole bunch.
It could be the case statement right there. That's been updated since this morning, or since last time you pulled.
Okay, but in this iteration, this actually did cause the problem. What you're saying,
yeah.
This current set of code. Okay, so what exactly was it that caused the problem then?
I think you're just throwing too many listeners on there all at once. And so what I did is I just changed it from each of those having listeners to the Marks Navigator listens to the page store. And then I pass in the thing that I need from the page store as a prop.
Oh, okay. So instead of each note display listening to the stores, the Marks Navigator listens to the stores and then passes the data to the notes display via the props.
Yep.
Okay. So that's probably something that's worth talking about and looking into. So usually you want to have like a higher level component be the one who listens to the store, and it sounds like that's what you've refactored the code to do. Let's see here. Pull down the latest, and maybe we can show the difference. All right, so this is the latest code then. So you've got the note display passing in the note, and now note display. It looks like note display still extends base component.
Yeah, it should. I don't know that I updated notes display. It was the highlights display that was giving me the problem.
All right, so we might want to change note display the same way you changed highlight display.
Yeah.
So it looks like highlight display also is still listening to these stores.
Oh, I haven't pushed that yet.
Okay. So
real quick?
What's that?
I can push that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead and push that up. All right. So is there a way to show the error before you do push that up? Because it's also worth seeing the error.
So when you're looking at that, the way I always got it to pop up is if you open up where you're running it and then open the highlights display.
I am not entirely sure I have. Something's not working on mine. So maybe it's not going to work. Here, let's do it this other way. Where did you allow for more event emitters for the books and the dashboard?
Just in the stores. So for that one, to fix that one, it was in the stores, or the highlight store.
It's in the highlight store, or was there one in the book?
Page store, sorry. It was a page store that was causing me to work on that one.
Okay. There it is. Pages. Okay. I didn't see it in here.
It should be that one. Do you want me to not push, or do you want me to push? Because it's in the push.
Let's look at the one that we fixed a while ago.
Okay, so bookstore and application store both have that in it.
Application store. Let's check application store. Okay.
Right, past it. Above all the switch statement stuff.
There we go.
That max listeners.
This guy right here. So I'm going to uncomment it just so that we can generate the error on purpose. Yes, should say I'm going to comment it out so we can generate the error on purpose. Of course, now the error isn't showing up.
You may have to open the components that are being iterated over.
Yeah, I think mine's in a non-working state. Okay, let's just talk through it then if I can't get the error to show up. So, I'm just trying to find somewhere that will even tell you what the, here it is. This is the error that you'll frequently see. Okay.
Do you want me to share mine? I commented out and my error came right up.
Sure, go ahead and share your screen and then I can pull that over. This is the error that you'll frequently see though. You'll see it in the console. It'll say, warning, possible event emitter, memory leak detected, 11 listeners added. Use emitter.setMaxListener. Okay, so we were having this problem. And the problem comes because you are setting a whole bunch of listeners for your event emitter. And I think that they set 10, maybe arbitrary, but it seemed like 10 is a pretty good number. And we don't typically run into it. But in this project we did. And you can see here's the error right there. Maybe a little bit bigger. But you'll get this warning, possible event emitter, memory leak detected, 11 listeners added. Now the solution to that is, one, you can set your set max listeners to 0. And if you do that, it will let you, it won't warn you anymore. It just turns off the warnings basically, and you can add them forever. I don't recommend doing that because there should be some limit at which your application breaks. And if you go If you have more than 1,000 listeners, for example, then you probably have a situation where you have iteration or recursion, and you're just adding these things forever, or you are forgetting to unlisten. So in the case of the application store, we legitimately have 13 listeners. So we just had to set the max listeners to 13. So anytime you start seeing that error, remember that the stores themselves, let's go take a look at some of the store code. The stores extend store common. And then if you go look at store common extends the EventEmitter prototype. So that means that all of the stores are event emitters. And each of those stores then has that limitation of how many listeners can you have. And so this add change listener right here is called for you automatically in the base component. So when I have a component that says, I'm going to start listening to some stores, and you hit this watch store, we eventually hit this watch stores method, and then the store add change listener. So this is the magic right here. It's just that one line of code, and it just says, hey, whenever the store emits a change, then you need to let me know that that change occurred, and we're going to call this store changed method. Now all of this again happens in the base component, so most of the time you never see this code. But the base component is then going to call get state and then set that new state, which is going to cause your component to re-render. Now we've abstracted all this away into these other classes because we didn't want to have to do this over and over again, but it's still worth understanding what's going on underneath the hood. Because I've seen a couple of instances where, let's see here. Well, there are a couple of components that will override the component did mount. Actually, the dashboard is an example of this. Let's go to the dashboard. So in the dashboard, it's commented out right now, but we have this component did mount, and we needed that because there were some specific bits of logic that we needed to check and then call methods based on the state of the application. Now, the first time I saw this application, I did not see this bit of code right there. So effectively what happens is you call component did mount, you do the logic that's specific to the component, and then you never call the base class, which means that these stores are never bound. So then you run into an error where you change the data, but your component never updates, and you wonder what's going on. Okay, so that's bad. But I've also seen a situation where people will override component will unmount, and they'll put that in here. Now, if you do that and forget to call super, it means you're going to stop listening to the store. And if this component is rendered into the screen multiple times, maybe because it's iterated over or for whatever other reason, then those event listeners are just going to be left hanging there, and you will get a memory leak because the store is still going to emit that change, and it's going to try to call a method that no longer exists. So just remember that if you override either component did mount or component will unmount, you need to call super so that the base class can clean up after itself. Okay, I'm going to comment that out for right now. So that was one issue, and it sounded like Ben had another issue where basically if you have these child components that you're going to iterate over, maybe you have 100 of these note display or 1,000 of the note display, and each one of those extends base component, then you're going to have a lot of overhead because you're going to have 1,000 components attempting to listen to multiple stores. And that can get expensive. So it's better to do exactly what Ben did, where you have this higher level component. This guy gets to listen to the store and then pass data to the child components via the props. And then you only have one event listener in the parent component, and all the children can just be dumb rendering components. The other benefit to that is it makes it simpler to reuse that component because its definition is in its properties rather than depending on some kind of internal state that it acquires from a store. All right. So there was another error that I ran into, which I believe is actually causing my application cannot work right now. Let's see if I can get it to come up. Of course, now it's not coming up at all. All right. Let's see. I'm just going to go into the code and see if I can find it. I believe it was in chart.js. Okay, so here's another situation. This component, I believe, is rendered inside of the dashboard. Let's see, I think there's somewhere in here, charts. I think this is it right here. Or maybe it's maybe there's a charts parent component and it's rendering each individual chart. Either way, this guy also has a component did mount. Now I've abstracted away the logic that was here into this try render chart. So if we go take a look at this try render chart, here's how we can get the method to error out. This. Before, it was just executing this code right here. And as it turns out, chart data was coming in as undefined. And that's because the dashboard didn't have the chart data available to it at the time that it rendered the first time. It might come later on when a store gets populated and then updates, and then the dashboard will re-render and then it can pass the appropriate data down into the chart. But there was no protection against this being undefined, so this was undefined, meaning this line would error out. Now what was interesting though is this component did mount would fail, and as a consequence, the dashboard's component did mount was never called. So you can have errors in one part of your application that will affect the rest of your application. So be careful when you start ignoring errors that look like this. So there's the error. You can see I cannot read property quiz of undefined. So now that I'm getting that error, let's go ahead and go into the dashboard. I'm going to put a breakpoint inside of the put it back. Dashboard component did mount. We're going to put this back. We don't want this logic, so I'm going to get rid of it. I'm just going to put a debugger statement in here, which will force it to stop, and then refresh the page. Takes a minute here, and you'll notice that we never hit that debugger right here, which means component did mount was never called. Now that can be really a frustrating experience. You're going to go out and you're going to Google component did mount never called. You're going to cuss at your computer because, hey, this is React and this should just happen. And you're going to wonder what the heck is going on. So if you run into a situation where you expect a certain behavior because that's what's given to you by the framework, but that's not what's happening, be sure to take a look at these other errors, because now if I go and put this check back into the code, refresh, then we should hit our breakpoint. Give that just a second. And there we are. So now it's appropriately calling it. You know, a side effect of this was that in the dashboard, the stores don't get populated in time for the dashboard to render. Under normal circumstances, that's fine. The dashboard renders, and then when the data comes into the stores, the dashboard detects that change and it will re-render. But that was not happening because component did mount couldn't be called, which meant that the stores were never listened to, and so this component would never re-render. And so that was problematic. Clean that up. Okay, so that's really kind of just a couple of things that we run into, just a couple of tips for working with React. Any questions or any other bugs that you've run into that seem really, really strange?
Can you go back to your charts.js? And then go back to the top. So I realized that we're not, well, never mind. Scratch my thought.
Okay, no worries. So there is something else interesting about charts.jsx, which is that we're using D3. So we let React render into the DOM, and then once it's done rendering, whether it did mount or did update, we're rendering this chart. And when we render the chart, there's a whole bunch of D3 code in here that handles that. I'm guessing this is the best way to do it, but I should actually do a little bit of reading to figure out if there's a tighter, nicer, cleaner integration with React and D3, or if this is kind of the given way to do it. There are a couple of situations where we've run into this, though, where React needs to render into the DOM, and once it's done, then we need to do stuff. For example, in the book, when you have highlights, we render the content of the book into the page, and then when that is completed, we have a different piece of code that goes back through the page and then detects where to add the highlights. Roger did a great job.
Justin, this is Robert here. Oh, sorry. What about, basically D3 needs an element to render onto.
Correct.
What if having the parent component set up that element, and then we don't have to do this, kind of dance around it in the child element, and we just let the child element, go immediately to town with the D3.
That sounds fine. And I think that would be a reasonable experiment to try, where you could have the parent, I think you could have the parent render the element and then pass the element ID as a property to the chart to tell it where it should render. I think you might still run into a situation where you have some uncertainty as to when the element will actually be available in the page. So even if so I'm not sure if the render in the parent would complete before the child. I would think it would actually be the other way, that the child would have to finish rendering, provide,
the
render
component
method
did mount,
actually,
so the parent's component did not fire, so you're still ending up with the same situation.
I think so. And with React, the render method is actually returning a function. Like it returns either a function or an object. I don't remember which, actually. Probably an object, and then that object is, like, it's all composed of all the different objects. So the JSX, all of this stuff that looks like HTML is actually, it's JSX, and so that gets turned into React objects. So we have a bunch of React create components for all these divs, as an example, and then that creates a virtual DOM, and then all of that gets rendered into the page. But I think that this stuff, actually, I think it might just return an entire virtual tree and then just renders it out. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure that you know when, like, a child would be rendered after a parent. I don't think you can slip yourself into that process. That's why I think you have to use the component did mount, component did update. So, anyway, we should do a little bit of reading on D3 when we have some time to figure out what the tight, nice integration would be. All right. Any other questions or comments or stuff you've run into, or should we call it a day and do it again tomorrow? Okay. Thanks, you guys. We will talk to you again soon.